So yesterday in part one of this video I picked my first of the main crop onion beds, and that was just a little bed, and you can see the results of that in part one. In part two today I am going to pick my main bed and one of my interplanted beds, and yeah, I'm just going to get on with it. So this has been one of my favourite interplants of the year, interplanting parsnips with onions. So my theory was, when I started this, that the parsnips and the onions wouldn't really interfere with each other. It allows me to plant the parsnips quite a long way apart, which hopefully will mean I'll get nice big parsnips, but also it allows me to plant the onions quite a long way apart, which means I get nice big storage onions. And the parsnips are just starting to sort of grow nice and big at exactly the time that the onions are ready for harvest. So I'm going to take these onions out and we'll see what's left in terms of the parsnips, and now I'll also be able to get in there and actually give the bed a weed, because it's pretty tricky to weed it with the combination of onions and parsnips in there. But the second part of the kind of theory here is that the onions are nice and shallow rooted and very easy to get out without causing any disruption at all to the parsnips that are kind of behind them, which are really deep rooted, of course. So I think it works really well, and obviously parsnips are an incredibly low value crop, and we only grow them really because we want to be self-sufficient. And the onions are also an extremely low value crop, so by combining two low value crops together it makes them a medium value crop. So there we go, we've got 33 parsnips left there, not all of them germinated, and they're all looking okay. They're small because I didn't plant them until early May, and that's because this bed was spring cabbages, so I had to give them time. But I planted them in early May before and they've been fine. The onion crop is excellent, really good. These were planted from sets, and I actually started them in modules about a month before I planted them out, because May is quite late to be planting onions. But honestly, they have not suffered one bit. So I'm going to get these cleaned up, I'll count them up, and I've got 2, maybe 3 down here that have rotted, and oh, they stink, and they some of them have got onion fly maggots in them, so that kind of explains that. But that is not bad. We do get onion fly here, and so to only have 4 out of that lot is not bad going. So this is the yield from that 2 metre squared interplant into the parsnips, and I'm exceptionally pleased with this. I think, as I've already mentioned, these were grown from sets. The sets were started sometime in April in module trays, and they were actually planted out into the parsnip bed sometime in May, and I'll put the exact dates up. There were two plantings at different dates, but the yield is great, and it's, I would say, 2/3 of the yield of the same area planted at much higher density, but with more high quality onions. So this kind of goes counter to my preference for higher density planting, to be honest, especially as I've also got a bonus parsnip crop. So I'm really kind of impressed and humbled in a way a bit by the size of this yield. And this isn't all of them, because I've also got these down here, and these are the ones that they're just a little bit damaged, there's a little bit of splitting on them or something like that, so these go into my use second category. So I've got some others that are use first, and these are the use first ones, and so these have just got like a little bit more damage, so only two use firsts, and I think there's about 5 inedibles because of onion fly out of that bed. So yeah, I'm thrilled with these. I'm just going to count them up now. Yeah. So 51 onions out of 2 meters squared. So that is very low density, but as I said, the onions are a really good size, but they're not oversized. These will still keep just fine. Although slightly smaller ones, maybe this sort of size, probably about the best keepers. Now, don't rule out high density planting just yet though, because the bed that I did yesterday was the worst bed. You know, I didn't give it enough care and attention, had a lot of the sets go to seed, and a lot of the ones that were grown from seed ended up being, you know, way too many seeds per module. And I didn't notice that for whatever reason, and so I ended up with 140 onions in a square metre when my target was 80 to 90, and as a result of that I just got loads of small onions. So yeah, but this is good. Let's see what my next bed looks like. So this bed got quite a bit more TLC, and I did try to make sure that most of the modules only had 2 or 3 seeds rather than the previous bed that had 4 and 5 seeds in quite a lot of them. So this is much more my target density. A few of these have still gone to seed, but I'm going to get these harvested and compare them with that lower density one in the parsnip bed. And then these are the ones grown from sets, planted at the higher density. And again, a few of these have gone to seed, but anyway, we'll see. So by way of comparison, this is roughly the same volume of onions that I harvested from the parsnip bed. So if you remember, the parsnip bed was 2 square meters, and that's the area of this higher density planting bed that I've harvested so far. So let's call that a metre. When you consider that I've also got the parsnip harvest out of that bed, I don't think that's bad really. So like half the yield, but the quality of the onions and the consistency of the onions was actually much better. So far, I think interplanting the onions from sets is winning in terms of quality. Higher density module sowing is winning slightly in terms of yield, but it's not as clear cut as I thought it was going to be. So that's the last of the red onions that were grown from seed. And that is a pretty good harvest. I've got to say, you know, I'm pleased with it. There's a nice mix of different sizes. The skin quality is not quite so good as it was on the ones grown from sets at the lower density. I had to take a few, for example, extra outer layers off on a few of these to get them down to a fully intact skin. But that's 1 3/4 square meters of onions there. Now, I think if I'd grown them 3 seeds to a module instead of 4 seeds to a module, I would have got even better results, and I'll show you the white onions as a good example of that. So when I planted these white onions, I tried quite hard to make sure there was only 3 seeds to a module. I did get one with 4 there, there's another one with 4, but I tried to get 3. Sometimes you just get late germination of a seed, and so you can't really do anything about that unless you come back and keep on examining everything, which I don't have time for. So that's interesting there because that's that's a half of a square metre, and that's the same yield there as from the 2 square metres in the parsnip bed. Now that's partly because of varieties, but let's get those picked, and then we'll look at the ones grown from sets, and I'll try and do a fair comparison. These are planted roughly the same density as the ones on this side, and we'll see if we can see a difference. Okay, so whether you're keeping track of this, I'm struggling myself. This is the yield from the 2 metre squared area of the main crop bed grown from seed. So that I think that's a pretty good yield from 2 metres squared. And it'll be interesting in the comments if people could let me know the sorts of yields that they're getting and how it compares. And size-wise, I'm happy. You know, the white onions are obviously bigger than the red onions, although there's a few red onions that are really big. I'm really targeting medium-sized onions. I think they keep just a little bit better. And onions grown from seed, again, reportedly keep just a little bit better, although I would question that just from the condition of the onions, because I would say that the onions grown from sets, the lower density, had less damage to the skins. So I have taken off the skin, the outer skins, to try and get an intact skin, completely intact skin. And sometimes on these I've had to take 2 layers off, whereas on the ones grown from sets I only had to take 1 layer off, as I did on these darker coloured ones. So that is not quite the total yield. I had those that either had gone to seed or just for whatever reason just didn't look good enough quality to be keepers. So hardly any really, and a lot of those are just really nice onions. They just had gone to seed or split a little bit or something. And now I've got an empty trestle table at the other end of the polytunnel, so that end's full of onions down there. I'm going to attempt to harvest the next batch and put them here so we can do an eyeball comparison. So let's just take a break from looking at yield and look at the roots on these onions. I've picked typical examples and you can see there's quite a big difference. So that is a set, and that one was started off in a module, and the module was planted, you know, fairly deep, and as a result maybe there's a really nice root system on that. Lots of fine roots, big roots, deep roots, really great. That was planted from a set, just pushed into the ground, and there's a tiny little root system on it. They came out of the ground so easily, it's almost as if they weren't rooted in the ground at all. Now the size was okay, although not on every one of them. The roots on that are massive. Now this white onion, look at the roots on this baby. Huge roots. And as a result, they grew really big. And then this, so that was grown from seed, and this was also grown from seed. And again, a reasonable root system, way better than the root system on the set that was planted at the same time. So all those 3 were all planted on the same day. So I would say from that if you're going to plant sets, definitely start them in a module, and definitely plant them, you know, fairly deep in the ground, and they get this really big root system, which has resulted in really nice big onions, more drought tolerant. And don't plant them direct, don't plant your sets direct in the ground, because if that's the result, and this is typical of all of them, tiny little root systems, and they pull out the ground so easily. White onions, I think these are Bedfordshire Champions or Elsa Craigs. They look the same pretty much. Huge root systems, so if it's drought tolerant, if you've got a lot of drought, these have done amazingly well this year. All of these were beautiful. And then if you are going to grow from seed, then yeah, again, you'd expect a better root system. And it's really noticeable when you're taking them out of the ground, pulling them out of the ground, that there's a really massive difference between the root systems on these 4 onions. So these are the onions grown from sets, and I think you can see fairly clearly with a comparison with the ones that are grown from seed that the yield here is way lower, and the quality of the onions is pretty much the same, to be honest. Nice mix of large and small. Well, not really very many small, mostly medium, so large and medium. Good, all of these are fine for storage. Same sort of number of problems with skin splitting type of issues, so pretty similar. A few more of the sets went to seed, but yeah, so that's a reasonably good comparison, I think. So that was all very interesting to me, at least. And I'm actually going to make a part 3 of this video, because I think drawing the conclusions from it needs some careful thought. I need to write it up, update the ebook with the advice and all that sort of thing. But I think what I can say with some confidence is that the best yield came from about a planting density of 80 onions per square metre. But the highest kind of quality blend yield, so the blend of quality and, you know, volume of harvest, came from 70, because that slightly reduced planting density did give a better quality. And I think, you know, on balance that's worth it, because there's only so many onions you can eat in the first couple of months. So you don't want too many in the kind of eat soon bucket. They're perfectly good onions, they taste fine, quality's fine, they're just not going to keep for like 6 months or so. But by far, I think the most interesting observation was the difference in the roots between the different planting mechanisms. And I'll just give you a quick overview of that, but I will try and get some footage in the 3rd video, if I can, to show you the differences. So anyway, so basically the highlights were that the ones grown from sets that were planted directly in the ground, they had the worst roots of all, and that was reflected in the size of that harvest. The second best were the ones grown from seed, but those were the sort of small little plants, so planted really young from seed, and they were okay. The yield of those was reasonable. The ones grown from seed that were bigger plants, so that were about 6 inches tall, which I planted deeper because they were bigger plants, so I probably planted those maybe an inch, maybe even deeper. They had amazing roots, and that again was reflected in the size of those white onions. The white onions are much bigger plants when I planted them, and as I say, so I put those deeper when I did my hole. I put them deeper down, well through the mulch, and they had amazing, huge root systems. And those plants, those bulbs, are huge by comparison with all the others. So yeah, so a really big marked difference in root quality, and that correlated beautifully with the size of the bulbs. So it's been an extremely dry time for us here. I think we've only had an inch of water in the last 90 days or something like that, and I have given the plants maybe an inch of water every 2 weeks or something like that. But onions, they need more than that, but it's just not practical for me to do any more watering than that. So yeah, so I think that is really interesting. and I'm definitely going to experiment with that again next year. So yeah, wait for part 3 really for all the kind of detailed conclusions, but I'm really happy. I mean, we needed to harvest about 430 red onions and about 144 white onions for the family until May, when we get our new crop of onions available. And so we've got just over that. I think we've got about 450, maybe 460 reds, and I think we've got maybe only 100 whites, but yeah, I mean, they'll just have to have reds instead of whites. But yeah, so it's about right. But we've also got a lot of shallots still to come. And the shallots are a bit behind, to be honest, the onions. So I'm giving them a little bit longer. At the moment, there's no sign of any of those splitting or anything like that. We haven't grown anywhere near as many shallots as we've grown in previous years. Although, you know, they just don't seem to keep quite as well for us. So we've done mainly onions, but I think we've got about probably 100, 150 shallots or something like that still to come. And of course we eat a lot of bunching onions, salad onions, spring onions, whatever you want to call them. I think I'm going to, if I can try and remember, I think I'm going to call them bunching onions from now on. And we've got some salad onions, which are bulbing onions, but specifically designed for eating fresh in salads because they're super sweet and crispy. So that is pretty much it. Yeah, it's been a long video, it's been a long day. I hope you find that interesting. And again, I really like a little bit of feedback from people in terms of their experience of trading off planting density against volume of production, quality of the resulting onions. Anybody else have this same observation about different roots, sizes and depths from different types of, you know, planting? And yeah, just any other general onion growing observation. As I've mentioned, I do have a little ebook on growing onions. I'm going to update it because I have learnt some new things this year. Obviously I learn new things every year and I'm always updating it, but I learnt some quite interesting things and some great material for experiments for next year. But if you've got observations that you think would be useful to add to that ebook and you have a read of it, and let me know in the comments or email or any other way, and then I'll consider including them, because I am trying to get that guide to be obviously as good as I can make it. So my name's Steve, this is the Seaside Kitchen Garden Allotment channel, and I'll see you soon.